Saat Farkı'ndan merhabalar. Her hafta farklı ülkelerden, farklı milletlerden konuklarla bölgesel ve küresel gelişmelere dair farklı perspektiflere yer vermeye çalışıyoruz. Bu hafta stüdyoda kıymetli bir misafirim var. Pakistan'dan Bahçeşehir Üniversitesi ile Lahore Üniversitesi ortaklığında bölgesel ve küresel güvenlik üzerine 2 günlük bir konferans düzenlendi İstanbul'da. Türkiye'den ve Pakistan'dan gazeteciler, akademisyenler buluştu ve karşılıklı fikir alışverişinde bulundular. Çok verimli bir etkinlikti. Bu etkinlik kapsamında İstanbul'da bulunan Lahore Üniversitesi Uluslararası İlişkiler Bölümü öğretim üyesi, aynı zamanda üniversitenin Güvenlik, Strateji ve Politika Araştırmaları Merkezi Direktörü Doçent Doktor Rabia Akhtar bizlerle. Kendisini bulmuşken hem biraz bölgeyi konuşacağız, hem Taliban, Afganistan, Türkiye-Pakistan ilişkileri ve bölgesel, küresel güvenlik üzerine konferansında aynı zamanda dokunduğu çeşitli meseleleri kendisiyle konuşacağız. Welcome Professor, welcome to Istanbul and welcome to my program.
Thank you so much, Feyza, for having me. It's a pleasure.
It is my pleasure, Professor. So, Professor, I would like to start with Pakistan, Pakistan's domestic politics. Then we will talk about some other broader foreign policy issues. I will start with Pakistan domestic policy because it was very surprising and unexpected, at least for us, most of us in Turkey, that Imran was ousted recently. Was it also unexpected and shocking for you, I wonder? He still refuses to accept his fall from power. I believe everyone is wondering why did this happen and what really happened. Could you please shed some light on the reasons and implications?
Thank you so much once again. I think it was not only shocking for Turkish people or the rest of the world, it was equally shocking for Pakistan and Pakistanis. We had been following his rise to power, his independent foreign policy stance, his making outreach with the Muslim world, with hosting OIC summits and taking a leadership role. And also then, making his visit to Russia right at the eve when, Putin decided to invade Ukraine. So back in Pakistan, as a citizen of Pakistan, his ouster was equally shocking for a lot of people. People not only who watch foreign policy issues very closely, but also people on the street, because Imran Khan is a very popular leader. And when a popularly elected government, was voted out through a vote of no confidence in the parliament, which actually is the democratic right of the opposition parties, so the process was democratic enough. But what led to that is like something that is still, there are a lot of questions surrounding that. There's a lot of speculation that goes on the streets as well in the country. The nation is divided. They don't know as to what is the real reason. There are several things that have come out. Firstly, his ouster is being linked to his visit to Russia. And there have been reports that the United States, wanted Pakistan not to visit Russia, or at least postpone it for a while Putin was deciding an invasion of Ukraine. And I think that intelligence was shared with the government. Yet, because the program was planned and it could not have been postponed any further, the government led by Imran Khan decided to go ahead with it. So that's one reason. The second, that reason that's been cited is a cable which was minutes of the meeting between our ambassador based in US, Washington, D.C. And the minutes of those meetings were shared with the government. And in those minutes, the tone that the US interlocutors who were having meetings with our ambassador, the tone and the tenor of that meeting was quite threatening. And that is actually what had triggered. So the questions, and some say it's conspiracy generated by the government, that there was US interference for bringing in a regime change, and then there was a conspiracy, and politicians on the opposite end were part of this conspiracy. Now, what I am willing to believe as an academic and a scholar is that, such cables are, a norm to be shared between diplomats, and there is always a diplomatic way to go about dealing with them. This is not the first cable that has come to Pakistan with a lot of threats in it. You know, during the time Pakistan was developing its nuclear weapons program and from 70s onwards, because my research is based on it and because I've seen such cables, read them myself, I know that this has been going on for years. But this is the first time that the government chose to make the contents or some context of it public. And once that reached the public, that's what created this whole narrative about that it could not just have been the contents of the letter without coinciding with the timings of the no confidence motion that was brought against his government, and then the members of the opposition meeting with the US counterparts in Islamabad. So a whole narrative has been generated, and it's like very difficult for people to buy this idea of interference by the United States to bring a regime change. What is difficult to establish is the conspiracy part of it, because there's no evidence to that account where the money has changed hands or whether opposition took the money. That part is still controversial. But the existence of that cable, which was the cipher, that happens. That has happened in history before as well. With this, his popularity, ever since his ouster now, has seen a boom. He was already popular, but now the people of Pakistan are out on the streets on his call because they want to challenge the current government and they want answers to these questions that still remain unanswered.
So the political stability is very fragile right now.
It is extremely fragile right now, and again, he's given a call. It wouldn't have seemed so fragile had people from lower middle class, upper middle class, even elite, younger population. Pakistan has a younger population under the age of 24. It's more than 60% of that population. That's a huge number, and they all are huge fans of Imran Khan because of his celebrity status prior to his becoming a politician. And he managed to maintain that celebrity aura about him. And most of the people, there are two things. One, the crowd that's joining him on the streets on his call is genuinely interested as to why was a democratically elected government, fell for this conspiracy, and what is the role of the US? So these are genuine questions. And the other end, there are people who are joining these rallies and political protests because the alternative that they see in the country, in the shape of current government or combined opposition, they are saying that they are corrupt leaders. They have cases against them, they're out back in the government, so that is not acceptable. So partly nation is following Imran Khan because they consider him their hero, and somebody who's not corrupt, somebody who wants the best for Pakistan. And then there are others who don't find an alternative other than Imran Khan suitable enough for Pakistan to have a leadership.
I see. Okay, interesting. Let's move on to the foreign policy then, Professor, your main area of expertise. So I would like to start with India, of course. How are the relations now, and what are the major problems? Is there any prospect of them being successfully tackled? Let's start with in India.
So India is a full basket case on its own. Pakistan has had hostile relationships with India since independence. We have this unfinished business of Kashmir, which is a disputed territory between India and Pakistan. So off and on, Pakistan and India have had several crises as well over Kashmir. But from August 15, 2019, when India unilaterally went ahead and revoked the statehood of Kashmir and dissolved its statehood through invoking their constitution and dissolving Article 370, that is when the problem actually started. Because it is a disputed territory, it needs to be resolved under the guidance and rules of the UN Security Council resolutions. And India cannot unilaterally take a stance by taking its statehood and merging it within the Constitution of India itself. So that's when the stalemate between India and Pakistan started onwards as well. But earlier in that year, Pakistan and India had a Balakot Pulwama crisis as well, where for the first time, actually not for the first time, since 1971 when Pakistan had broken up, India had crossed mainland to attack Pakistani mainland territory, and Pakistan responded to it. So we had strained relations ever since, but more so, August 15, 2019 was the watershed where both countries suspended diplomatic ties and they were not speaking to each other. And terrorism, counterterrorism, Pakistan has said, to India most of the times that, there are issues that can be resolved. We need to sit down and talk. But India does not want to talk, does not take any of Pakistan's recommendations seriously. That is one thing. Secondly, since August 15, 2019, the world was undergoing this experience of the pandemic.
Yeah.
All of us experienced being locked inside our houses, being incarcerated. Kashmiris, for the past so many years, have had the same feeling which the rest of the world experienced during pandemic. They had been experiencing it for years under Indian illegal occupation. And COVID just exacerbated, their challenges and troubles. So Pakistan has been a very vocal proponent of human rights abuses by Indian military in Kashmir. And we actually have used lawfare, we have used various international channels to raise the issue of Kashmir, not only the issue of Kashmir, but also engage the international community to look at the war crimes that are happening. They're not simply human rights abuses anymore. They've crossed, they've transcended, it's a beast on its own, and they need to be looked at as war crimes by India. So the situation between India and Pakistan is not conducive enough for talk at this present time, and for the past 3-4 years. Adding to the mix is the treatment of Indian Muslims inside India and the Hindutva, militarized Hindutva ideology that Modi, the Prime Minister of India, is propagating, and the treatment of Indian Muslims. So I think it's a plethora of issues that have come together, and I don't foresee that in near future, unless and until, the statehood of Jammu and Kashmir is reinstated and India goes back to status quo ante and restores the statehood, only that's the point Pakistan will even think of talking to India. But I don't see that happening in near future. So it's a huge set of challenges there with India and Pakistan.
So next, of course, Afghanistan, Professor. I also would like to talk to you on Afghanistan, especially after Taliban takeover. Is Pakistan overall happy with the Taliban's takeover? The Western analysts claim that Pakistan used to have some leverage over the Taliban. Was this ever the case, and is it the case now? Or to put it different, has Afghanistan become Pakistan's backwater thanks to the Taliban?
Thank you so much for that question. Ever since Taliban have been in power, again, August 15th last year, it's quite interesting when people say that Taliban are Pakistan's proxy. And Pakistan wants to run Afghanistan through Taliban. And now that Taliban are in power, all of Pakistan's troubles have gone away. I think there is no bigger myth out there than this. Ever since Taliban have come into power, Pakistan has realized that its challenges have only increased with the Taliban. The only leverage Pakistan had with the Taliban, and it used that leverage, was to bring them to the negotiating table when United States agreed that it wanted to talk to the Taliban because they considered Taliban to be a stakeholder in the political process in Afghanistan once they had set a timeline to leave the region. And that was only natural. Pakistan came forth because pre-2001 decade, from 1990s onwards, Pakistan was one of the countries other than Saudi Arabia and UAE to recognize the Taliban. And we were talking to them because they are like in our immediate neighborhood. You cannot afford not to have a conversation with your neighbors, especially when you already have a volatile eastern border. We cannot afford to have a volatile, hostile western border in Afghanistan. So that leverage Pakistan used in order to bring Taliban to the negotiating table and strike a peace deal with, through the Doha agreement process. But when the Taliban have come to power, the sets of challenges that I'm talking about with respect to Taliban are pretty severe for Pakistan. Pakistan, the kind of terrorism Pakistan has faced ever since 2001 when it decided to join the United States, Pakistan has lost 80,000 plus lives due to terrorism, due to a war which was never our war to begin with. But because we sided with the United States and NATO forces, we had to suffer terrorism and, within our territorial boundaries. Now, the groups like Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan that emerged from within Pakistan, they have gained a stronghold in Afghanistan, and they are attacking Pakistan using Afghan territory. So when Taliban came to power, Pakistan's first demand obviously was to stop TTP from attacking the state of Pakistan. And we have seen that nothing has happened. Taliban continue to give us guarantees that they will tell TTP not to use Afghan territory to attack Pakistan, but since August 15, 2020, last year, there have been more than 250 terrorist attacks inside Pakistan launched by TTP, and each of them claimed by TTP. And their presence is not inside Pakistan, because if it was inside Pakistan, we would have already done something about it. They are in the neighboring, immediate border areas in Afghanistan, and there are reports that even Taliban cannot go into the stronghold of TTP right across Pakistan-Afghan border. So that's one set of challenges. Secondly is the challenge of not accepting the Durand line as an international border. And Pakistan had been fencing that border because Pakistan did not want these terrorists to cross over the porous border, come inside Pakistan, attack them, and then go back. So Taliban have an issue with fencing. We have had, on several places, we have had issues where some of the Taliban commanders even uprooted that fence, and there was exchange of fire between our military and Taliban commanders on the other end. And they also have not given us any commitment that they are willing to recognize that boundary line as an international border between, Pakistan and Afghanistan. So, these sets of challenges. And the third, of course, is recognition. I think the Taliban, when they came into power, they thought that one country that would recognize them immediately would be Pakistan.
Yeah.
And you can see that, Pakistan, throughout its diplomatic process, has been trying to raise a multilateral stakeholder consensus, which does not only include Pakistan, it includes Iran, it includes, Central Asian republics, it includes China, includes Russia to some extent, and in the broader neighborhood consensus to come together and then put these demands on the table and tell Taliban that if you say that you have transformed, then these are some of the conditions that the international community wants you to live up to or show us that the transformation has happened, and obviously recognition process would start. But in the absence of all that, you're not having an inclusive government. Then Taliban going on and closing the schools, not allowing girls' education, and so on and so forth, and the flag issues. There have been a whole host of issues. So that transformation that the world wants to see in Taliban is not forthcoming. Yet the Taliban continue to believe that the world is going to recognize them without any quid pro quo established between powers and Taliban. So Pakistan has its hands full. With respect to the Taliban, and it's not all rosy. It's as the world believes that now Pakistan has got it all sorted out. We have had skirmishes at the border itself, and Pakistan already has a weak, fragile eastern border, and the western border also doesn't look too stable.
Yeah, Professor, we have only 5 minutes left. I have so many questions. But we have a limited time. So I want to also ask you about the US and China competition now, because now, Pakistan's relations with the US seem to have gradually worsened, especially since the US invasion of Afghanistan. But now US withdrew from the country. And on the other hand, the US is grooming India against China and developing stronger relations with Pakistan's arch rival. So during this competition, World Powers competition, how does Pakistan stand? Where does Pakistan stand? And what do you think the future holds in terms of Pakistan-China relations, Pakistan-US relations, and maybe you can also talk about Turkey's role in the region and broader region as well. I'm sorry, it's a very broad question, I know, but we have a limited time. Thank you very much.
Sure, I know. I think Pakistan-US relations have a very long history, but United States is a very, very important partner for Pakistan, and Pakistan cannot afford not to have a positive relationship with the United States. Over a period of years, this 20 years of war, Pakistan has sided with the United States and fought and cooperated with the US on counterterrorism as well. So there's that. But post-US withdrawal, the situation is different because US has exited the region, but it doesn't mean that it brings an end to the relationship. Pakistan's national security policy, which was unveiled earlier this year, talks about geoeconomics as a priority, but not at the cost of geostrategy or geopolitics, but in tandem with them. So I think United States has a huge role to play, and Pakistan has been trying to assort some of the fears that the US has, that Pakistan is putting all its eggs in the China basket. And Pakistan has been trying to tell them that no, geoeconomics is our priority, and if China, through China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, is investing in Pakistan, through special economic zones, it doesn't stop any other country, including United States, to not come into Pakistan and invest in those special economic zones. So it is not a mutually exclusive zone where only Pakistan and China can work. So that signaling has been done on Pakistan's, through Pakistan's Foreign Office and government. With respect to India being groomed against China, yes, of course, it exacerbates Pakistan's anxieties and security dilemma because there is a huge defense cooperation going on. Yeah. And also, with respect to logistics and communications being shared, which is strategic communication, which affects both Pakistan and China. So those anxieties obviously exist. As far as Turkey is concerned, Pakistan looks up to Turkey to take a leadership role in the region. And Pakistan and Turkey have had historical relations. Now, post-US withdrawal, and the reason I was here in Istanbul was because of the conferences we were doing with our Turkish counterparts, various universities, was to explore Pakistan and Turkish leadership potential post-US withdrawal, look at the region and see what is our leadership potential, what is the direction our region needs to take, rather than taking dictates from the external regional players like the United States. And with that, we want a peaceful neighborhood. We want a peaceful Afghanistan. We want investment from China, Russia in Afghanistan so that stability comes. And if US has a role to play in it, US is more than welcome to join. So it is, again, not going to be an exclusive zone where only regional countries will come together at the exclusion of the US. Pakistan very much wants all powers to come, and it's a very difficult and challenging balancing act, but that's the challenge of Pakistan's foreign policy. And I'm sure with stability at home, looking inwards, strengthening the economy, I think Pakistan's foreign policy, at the heart of which is now geoeconomics, if we continue on this path, then I think that's a very good anchor to suggest as to what our future direction is going to be.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Professor. Unfortunately, time is up, but hopefully we will meet in Lahore next time.
I would love to host you in Lahore.
Thank you very much, Professor. Thanks for coming.
So
evet, Saat Farkı'nda bu hafta Pakistan'dan kıymetli bir konuğumuz vardı. Lahore Üniversitesi'nden. İstanbul'da çeşitli konferanslara katılmak için bir dizi heyet geldi Lahore Üniversitesi'nden. Akademisyenler buradaydı. Ve bu heyetin içerisinde yer alan Lahore Üniversitesi Uluslararası İlişkiler Bölümü öğretim üyesi Doçent Doktor Rabia Akhtar bu hafta bizlerleydi. Pakistan'ı konuştuk, Hindistan'ı konuştuk, Afganistan'ı konuştuk, Türkiye ile ilişkileri konuştuk, ABD'nin bölgeden çekilmesi sonrası. Olabilecek senaryoları konuştuk, pek çok şeyi konuşmaya çalıştık, yarım saate sığdırmaya çalıştık. Önümüzdeki hafta yine farklı bir konuyla, farklı bir konukla görüşmek dileğiyle, hoşçakalın.